Ladies and gentlemen, our final speaker of block two, Eduardo Whitlam, and he's a passionate teacher with over 15 years of experience working as an English teacher in different countries around the world, including Japan, Hong Kong, and Colombia. And throughout this time, he's had the opportunity to develop his own teaching style that is focused on building students' confidence and helping them implement learning strategies so that English can become part of their lives and a tool to extend their abilities to communicate for all necessities. As we've just found out, he's in Australia. He's based in Sydney, where he continues to teach English. And today, this morning, this evening, this afternoon, depending on where you are, he's going to talk to us about student engagement and motivation. So, Eduardo, over to you. Enjoy your time.
Okay, thank you so much. And firstly, I'd just like to say hello to everyone that is listening in, and thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So to all the teachers in listening, I'd just like to say, you guys are amazing. And this topic on engagement and motivation, I hope that I'll be able to provide you guys some interesting ideas to think about and some tips that have helped me over my years of teaching, and I hope that they serve you. So welcome, and thanks for having me here and for taking the time to listen to my talk, and I hope that you enjoy it. So obviously today we're talking about student engagement and motivation, probably two of fundamental things that we need to consider with teaching. And the first thing that I would like to do today is just quickly introduce myself a little bit so that you know who I am and a little bit about my career, just so that we have a little bit of context. And then I'm going to be talking about what engagement may look like in our classrooms and some barriers to engagement. So what things might negatively impact on the ability of students to be able to engage, and then some ways that we can improve that. So, giving you guys some tips that have worked for me that will be able to help us get through some of those barriers. So those are the things that I would like us to look at today. So I'm sure there are many people here that have had a similar experience. When I finished high school, I decided that I wanted to travel around the world and get to see the world. I had no idea at that point that I was going to be interested in teaching English. I was just like, yeah, I don't really want to go to university yet, and I don't know what I want to do, so let's go traveling. And in my time that I traveled, and I spent most of my time in Asia and South America, and also a little bit of time in Europe, I started to realize that, oh my God, there's a great potential to be able to make money and still travel and enjoy, life, being on the road and being able to teach English. And at that time, if you came from an English-speaking country, it was really easy to get work. I know things have changed a little bit now, but so it was great. You can travel and see amazing places, and I was like, and I can teach English. And I realized during that time also that I really enjoyed sharing with people, being in a class with people from different places, different cultures. It was just really interesting to be able to share experiences with them. So that's one of the reasons why I started initially teaching English. And also I started to get to know more about what I liked and what I didn't like, and to see as a career potentially teaching. That was all part of it. So, and hey, the world is an amazing place, right? So it's a pretty rewarding career if you're interested, of course. And I'm sure a lot of you are traveling and working in different countries. So that was very much the case for me. So the first place that I initially started working as an English teacher was actually in Japan. I did all my CELTA and TESOL qualifications in Sydney just before I went to Japan, because I thought, it would be great to have that qualification, and if I wanted to work, and I just thought that it would give me some flexibility. So when I was in Japan, I had a wonderful time. Japan's a terrific country, and I worked with young kids as well as older adults. So it was a really nice experience to start off as a teacher. And I noticed some interesting parts about the students there. So in terms of characteristics, and the reason that I'm highlighting some characteristics here is because later on, I'm going to compare those characteristics with students from other places as well, which will tie in with the engagement motivation theme. So sure, some of you may know already, but Japanese students tend to be extremely motivated and disciplined. They typically have very good grammar, strong grammar skills, but they may struggle with, and a lot of other countries as well, all around the world, with speaking fluency and just relaxing into having conversations. So it's difficult, I noticed in that culture, for people to express their emotions. And so it was really interesting to see that. So really disciplined, but struggled a little bit to just relax and let go. They took corrections really, really well, which was great. And comparing that to another culture in a moment, yeah, that's an important thing. And I'll talk about that in a second. So I'd like to compare the experience with the students in Japan a little bit to those that I had in Colombia. So I was actually born in Colombia, and I was adopted by an Australian family to come and live here in Australia. And so when I finished my university, I decided to go back to Colombia and work for a couple of years. And I ended up staying there for 8 years because of the pandemic. And what a contrast, you know, between Japan and Colombia in terms of culture, in terms of the way students learn, the way students were motivated for different reasons. So there were some similarities, but there were also some differences. So Colombia, I noticed that the students weren't quite as disciplined. They weren't as good at taking corrections, you know, like giving that feedback, because Colombians tend to be quite proud people. And so I noticed that I had to be strategic in the way that I gave my corrections. But there was definitely a more lack of that they were more relaxed, and there was a lack of confidence, but they were more relaxed, you know, in general. And I saw for the first time that I could potentially change people's lives by helping them with their English, because if you can speak English in Latin America, it just opens up doorways for your lives professionally. And this was the first time that it wasn't so much because I want to travel around and make money. It was because I can see that I can make a difference to people's lives, and that was great. And that made me feel, you know, obviously really good about my work. So a lot of them do it for professional reasons, and that's important to understand the motivations why I think your students are coming to your classes. So, okay, so where am I at the moment? Me and my family moved back to Sydney from Colombia just March this year. At the moment, I'm working in a high school as a health and physical education teacher, and I'm teaching English at a university here, the University of New South Wales. And then so I'm passionate as ever about helping students learn English. So yeah, let's continue on. So the first block that I would like to talk about is a little bit around engagement and motivation itself, and understanding what they mean, what these words, how can they be defined? And let's look at that as our base to start from today. So what is engagement and what is motivation? So what I would like you guys to do is just take a moment to write down your own definition of engagement and motivation. So how would you define engagement and motivation? Are they the same? If they're not the same, how do they differ? And what is their relationship? So I'm just going to give you guys a moment, just a moment, 2 minutes or a minute, just to write down in the chat your own definitions of what is motivation and what is engagement. Nice. What pushes you to do something? Very nice. I like that, Francis. Absolutely. I'm seeing some amazing answers here. Like, they're not the same. Okay. Engagement is hard work. That's interesting. How involved you are with something. I saw that just there, the answer to engagement being how involved you are, being hooked. Love this. You guys are definitely on the same page. Okay, terrific. Great. That was terrific. So yeah, very, very similar ideas. And I think this is really important, right? As teachers, like, to understand, well, what are they and how do they interact or not? So the first thing that I've got here is that basically motivation is the initiating step. So motivation is, from my research, is very much the reason why people come to us to learn English. Yeah. So is that professional? Is it because they just want to be able to communicate in social media or for travel purposes? So what is the motivation? Why are they coming to us? And the engagement is definitely how we keep them hooked. I love that word. How can we sustain the learning activity? So the question that I have there next is then, can a student be motivated but not engaged in a class? And I was thinking about this, and you can be very motivated to learn English, but be completely bored in the process. And I think of it very similar to, going to the gym, right? Getting that exercise regime going. Like, you can be really motivated, like, yeah, I want to go to the gym and get really fit for summer or whatever. But then you can be completely like disengaged with the process. You could be at the gym completely bored and wanting to be at home doing something else. So yeah, they connect, but one does not necessarily mean that the other is going to happen. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to realize that. So it's crucial. Motivation is crucial to engagement because motivation is what activates the behavior itself. So I think that's really important, that we understand the differences. Okay. So for me, in my personal journey, I like very much to think about these two as like that Zen circle from Japan that we see, that it's kind of like the motivation is the beginning of the circle and the engagement is the tail. So they are very much connected. One impacts on the other in infinite cycles, because as we know in the classroom and in teaching, it's very much a dynamic environment. But engagement is also multifaceted. And I could potentially do we could probably do a week-long seminar on engagement and how multifaceted it is, because there are lots of different components to engagement. And I realized this in doing my research for this presentation. You have cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and social. They're typically the ones that they recognize now as engagement and what can comprise of engagement in classrooms. So to keep it really simple, I could have probably gone deeper into this, but because there's other things that I would like to address today. But if you're interested in this topic, there's lots of research on engagement and how these help out, So cognitive is obviously how engaged are they in the learning process, in their learning process? Are they being pushed? Do they feel that they can master what they're learning? Emotionally, how do they feel about what they're learning? Are they excited? Are they enjoying themselves? Are they happy? Are they interested? Their behavioral aspects. So how is their behavior affecting, or their attitudes affecting the way that they learn? And also the social contexts that they're being given in classes to be able to be engaged. So, if we just stand up the front and there's no and teach them, but there's no interaction with any of the other students, then maybe socially they're not being so engaged. You know, there may be a student over the one side of the room that would really love to have a conversation with another student on the other side of the room, but if we're not giving them the opportunity, well, it's just not going to happen. So, okay, poll time. So what I want you guys to do is have a look at this poll and give me your answers. Woo. So from research, what percentage do you guys think that ESL and EFL classes are students not engaged or not paying attention for more than half of the duration of the lesson? Okay, so put down what you reckon. A, 10%, B, 45%, C, 62%, or D, 92%. So, all right. So how do we go here? Well, let's give this a minute just while I have my water. Ooh, it's close. Okay. All right. So I can see here that most of us are going with 45%, but it's very close, right? It's very close, that between that 62 and 45%. Terrific. So the answer is actually 62%. So if you put down 62%, you would be right. And I took this research from a Pakistani journal that was looking at before an intervention. So before, I think it was collaborative learning was introduced. So if we just get up there and basically lecture students on how to learn English, up to 62% for more than half the lesson were not really engaged in it at all. So it's a very, very high amount of time. Okay, so what does engagement look like? What do students actually do when they're engaged? So what I would like you guys to do is just take a minute to write down three ways that you can tell that your class is engaged in your lesson. So what does it look like to you? Write down just a few. 3 ideas. Okay, they laugh. They want to share their ideas. They raise their hands, they participate. Working groups, love it. Body language, awesome. And we're going to talk about that as well a little bit in a while. Okay, you guys are awesome. I can see again that you are coming up with amazing ideas, you know, eye contact, working, participating, talking together. This is great. Projects, love it. Okay, amazing, absolutely amazing. Okay, so very much so. For me, what I found is that, or what I've noticed in my years of teaching, is that there are some of these. Now, you guys have probably got way more. I could only fit mine on this one slide, but you guys have got way more. So this is terrific. So things that I've noticed: students actively listening. And what does active listening actually look like? You know, do they just listen with their ears, or are they also listening with their body? And what are they doing with their bodies as they listen and as they interact? And I've noticed that a lot of the time the interaction is really smooth. So it's, you know, it's dynamic and it's relaxed and it flows. And I'm going to talk about flow later, but they look relaxed and happy. They ask questions. They're not afraid to ask questions. They aren't worrying about making mistakes. And that's something that is a huge topic that I'm going to be talking about very soon. They can relate to the topics, they smile, and also, as many of you have said, body language is key. So what is their body actually telling us? And I think it can be really difficult to go into an English lesson and think, I want to do this, I want to do that, and you're thinking and you're enthusiastic and you want to get things done. But at the same time, I think it's really important just to sit back and observe and see what's actually going on in your class, like how could I tweak something in this activity? Or could it be that I don't think that activity is going to work today? It may have worked yesterday. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work today. Yeah, so I think that's what I've noticed anyway. Okay, so this is a little reflection moment, a little active pause moment, if you want to call it that. I do use these in my classes just to give my students a moment just to take a break and just to relax. So I get them to think about a reflection moment. So there's a frog sitting by the river and he starts singing to the night sky. Every few minutes, the frog stops and silence falls. He then starts singing again. What makes the frog's music? His song or the silence? So guys, write down your answers and just take a moment to have a glass of water or take a sip of your water. Stretch your necks for a moment, just to give yourselves a little break. And I'll have a glass of or a little sip of my water and we'll start up again. All right, we got both there. Yeah, cool. Yeah, terrific. All right, stretch. Okie dokie. Cool. All right, so active pauses, definitely use them. Get your students up and moving. If they're sitting down too long, that can also be not such a positive thing. All right, so next we're going to be looking at barriers to engagement. So what are some things that stop potentially our students being engaged in classes? And I think it's really important that we think about these things so that we can then learn some ways, and I'll give you guys in the next section of this talk some tips on how you can get over these barriers. All right. So obviously, as we talked about the definitions of motivation and engagement before, the more motivated and engaged the student is, the greater the rate of success. Well, I mean, that's not anything new. But quickly here, love the interaction with you guys, so to not feel like I'm just speaking by myself. Would love you guys to write down 5 barriers to engagement that you have noticed or that you can think of. All right, just give you a minute. 5 barriers. Yeah, mobile phones. Woo. Fear of making mistakes, huge. Tired, shyness, fear of evaluation, interesting. Disinterest, anxiety, huge. This is great. Awesome. All right. So I'm seeing some really, really, really good ideas here again. So yeah, you guys are on the ball. 100%. So these are, on this slide, what I've done is, again, I've just provided some. Now, obviously, there are way more than just these, of course, and you guys have come up with some amazing other barriers or potential barriers. So these are just some ones that I could think of that I thought were, really important maybe to think about. So you've got limited language proficiency, sorry. So limited language proficiency, cultural differences, fear of making mistakes, so perfectionism, class sizes, too much explicit teaching, lack of rapport with students, the human connection, and then, of course, lack of patience, typically from the teacher. Okay? Now, we're going to do another poll because I think that a second poll would be nice. I want you guys to give me your biggest three. So choose three that you think are the biggest in my list here. So if you think that class size is number one, then put that as your first option. If you think lack of patience is it's number two, so put that as your second. So I'm going to go here as well. I'm going to be part of the poll. Why not? And I'm going to put mine here. Okay, so put your three down, please. Okay, see the numbers shift. Okay, interesting that a lot of us are, that limited language proficiency is up there as well. Okay, interesting. And very much in agreement with the perfectionism being a big barrier. Yeah. Great. Okay, that's very much, you guys have picked very much what things say, at least my experiences and also the research that I've done. Yeah, fear of mistakes is a huge one, and we're going to be dedicating a whole slide to that in one moment. So, question, why is limited language proficiency a barrier at the beginning? Because I think we need to understand why our students are sometimes coming to our classes. And a lot of the time students are coming to class because they need to pass their English test to be able to perhaps work in another country or for studying purposes. So I think it's really good everyone to understand why they're coming to our class, to understand the motivation there and how at the beginning phase of their journey with learning English. So students need to be at a high level, to really get the most out of the lesson? How much explicit teaching should we be using with beginners? And there's this self-efficacy idea that I think is really, really, really important, that students believe that they can be successful. So it's kind of like, if a student doesn't believe that they're going to be able to learn English, they're not going to be engaged and they're going to lose their motivation. So we, I think, have to help them see that it's going to be possible with some patience and with persistent work and some time, that it is within their reach. So I think limited language proficiency can be a barrier, but we can get over that by giving them the right motivation tips, which we'll talk about later, but we can do it. Yeah. So it is a barrier, but one that we can overcome very much. And all of them we can overcome with a little bit of strategy. Cultural differences, they are important. So I definitely think that getting to know your students is super important. Yeah, obviously. Take the time to get to know them, not just in the class, but also, if you have a salon that students go to before class, get there early and walk around and just chat. I noticed that sitting down before and after class with students was a really good way to get to know them. If you're taking the elevator up to your floor, perhaps in your building or whatever, and there's a student in there, just talk to them. Those little conversations can make a huge difference in terms of your overall rapport with your students. So, with cultural differences, show interest, but also be really sensitive to differences. I have something that happened to me in Japan a lot that was kind of difficult at the beginning, was that in Australia, we use a lot of sarcasm in our humor and we laugh a lot at ourselves. But when I was in Japan, I used to try and make my students, I'd crack a joke using sarcasm. And in Japan, sarcasm doesn't really work. So I noticed that I was getting a lot of really uncomfortable silences after I'd say a joke in Japan, because they just did not get it, right? So you have to be really careful with how you use different things in your classes. And if you can learn a little something about their culture, or say a few words in their language, or show an interest that way, it also works really well. Okay. Haha. So fear of making mistakes was our winner in our recent poll. And it is so, so, so true. I don't know about you guys, but I started to notice that education worldwide seemed to be always obsessed with perfection. Like, you have to get 100% in your exams, or in a test or a quiz or whatever. Everything is about the result, or how well you memorize, or so our whole educational framework was based around perfection, students being perfect and getting the perfect results, and not so much on how they get there, or the learning, or how interested they are. So I think that a lot of the time students come to our English classes with the same idea, like, I have to speak perfectly. And even us as native speakers, we don't speak perfectly all the time. And that's language as being a dynamic, ever-changing environment. It just doesn't really work that way. And I think that we need to get that out of there, that need to look for perfection. And I don't know about you guys, but I've also noticed that there are so many students that come to me that say, I need to change my accent when I'm speaking English. And I don't really think that perfection in that sense is such a positive thing sometimes. And actually, I've had some of my best students over the years that had strong accents, but they were amazing communicators in English. So I think we need to reassess this idea of what perfection, is perfection really needed in our classes? And I've come to the conclusion that it's not, that we need to enjoy the communication. They need to be enjoying themselves. So I decided to use this slide to tell you guys a little story. I'm a big fan of storytelling in classes as well. And this story was told to me when I was in Japan. I was living up in the mountains with my Aikido teacher, kind of like Mr. Miyagi in the movie The Karate Kid. And he told me this story about perfectionism. Well, it's kind of connected to perfectionism, and that's why I thought it might be nice to share with you guys. Okay, so there is a master, and he's working with his students, and his skill is archery. So they're practicing archery, which in Japan is called kudo. And then his student is finishing his final test. So he has to go through this runway, and he has to hit every single target as he goes through. So he's on his horse, and he has this obstacle course. And on the trees, there are targets, and has to hit those targets perfectly as he goes through. So anyway, he does the whole obstacle course, he finishes the test, and he's 100% on spot. He's hit every target, he hasn't missed anything, done an amazing job. So he gets off his horse, super confident, little bit cocky, and he says to his master, I did everything, it was perfect. I think I'm ready to become a master. And his master says, yeah, you did an amazing job. That was incredible. You didn't miss anything. Yeah, like you're well on your way to becoming a teacher. And he says, so can I start now? I don't need to come to you anymore. And he says, well, look, the master says, there's one last thing that I would like for you to learn. So I want you, a last lesson, and it's easy, you'll do it easily. I want you to come to the top of that mountain tomorrow morning at 4:30 in the morning. He says, yeah, okay, no problem. The master says, and enjoy tonight, celebrate with your friends, drink, do whatever, but make sure that you're up the top of that mountain at 4:30 tomorrow. So he says, yeah, sure, no problem, sensei, I'll be there. So he goes off and he has a wonderful night, celebrates, and nearly forgets about his appointment with his teacher the next day. But somehow he gets the strength to climb the mountain. And once he reaches the top of the mountain, he sees this clearing where his teacher is basically standing on the side of a huge cliff. And his toes are on the ground, but the rest of his body is almost in the air. And he takes one foot off and places it on the inside of his other thigh, kind of like that yoga stance, the tree stance, I think it is. And he gets out of his pocket, the teacher, an apple and throws it into the abyss, so into the air. And as the apple is falling, his teacher takes out 2 arrows and fires them off after the apple. And you can hear in the distance the apple getting shattered with these arrows. And so the student was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, how did he do that? Right on the edge of the cliff and the arrow's falling, like the apple is falling. How did he do that? So anyway, goes over to his master and he says, that was amazing. I can't believe that you just did that. Absolutely awestruck by what he just saw. And his master turned around and said, it's your turn. You have to do the same thing. This is your final test for you to become a teacher. So he looks at his master. He's like, I'm still drunk. I don't think I can do that. And he says, well, you're going to have to try. So he kind of gets to the edge of the cliff. He's barely standing. He's absolutely petrified that if he stands up, he'll fall. So he's kind of like crawling to the edge of the cliff. And he tries, he fumbles his apple and it just he can't throw it. And he's absolutely distraught, the fact that he can't do this final test. But he turns around to his teacher and he says, I cannot do this. I can't do this. His teacher said, that's interesting, because the conditions yesterday, you could do everything. But the moment that you're asked to do something now, when you're not ready, you can't do it. So what does that tell you? And the student looks at his master and says, the main reason I can't do this is because I'm afraid. He says, what are you afraid of? I'm afraid of falling and I'm afraid of failing. So his master says, well, the target is not the goal. Yeah. The goal is to improve yourself as a person so that you don't have the fear there in the first place. Or even if the fear comes, that it becomes part of your learning. Yeah. So I've put there, the target is not the goal. Yeah. We need to be teaching, I think, our students to be able to enjoy the whole process and not get too focused on perfection, because perfection is not necessarily the way that we should gauge their success. If we gauge the student's success on being able to hit the targets, fine. But when it was important for him to be able to do something, he couldn't. So, little story. I hope that you guys enjoyed that. I got lots of them when I was in Japan, and I love using stories. So I saw that someone uses stories before and they're amazing. So use them. Okay, So too much explicit learning. I'm sure you guys know about explicit teaching. Explicit teaching. I think he said learning. If you stand up and lecture your students too much, they're just going to disconnect. Yeah, they're just going to disconnect. So we have to find ways that we can engage them more, obviously. So using creativity, critical thinking in their learning. If there's too much explicit teaching, they're not really taking charge and becoming autonomous learners. So they tend to become more bored, disengaged, and the teacher's making all of the decisions for them. So how are they learning to take charge of their learning process with English? And as we know, like learning happens through communication. It's not just listening to instructions, right? Like we have to get our hands dirty and get into it and get out of our comfort zone. So the next is about lack of rapport with students. So obviously if we don't get to know them well enough, we can't really get that feel of like, hey, you know, like we're relaxed now. I know your name and I know a little bit about you. So that rapport is going to feed into their confidence so that when they're in class, they can let their hair down and relax, which is what we want. I noticed that the more I could get them into that state, the faster they learned, without a doubt. And I don't know about you guys, but have you guys ever been at a party where you don't know anyone and it's like you've been invited by like one friend and you're sort of sitting there at the beginning on the couch, really unsure of yourself. and it's like you don't know how to get involved into the party and you don't really know how to get into the flow. And then there's that one friend that has that ability to come over to you and kind of get you involved in everything. Like they introduce you to people and they get you a drink and, you know, and by the end of the party, you're so engaged in the party that you don't want to leave. You're so, you know, you're having such a good time that you want to stay, whereas at the beginning you wanted to leave, right? So we need to be that friend that is able to connect our students with the party of the class, you know, with the flow of the class. We need to be that person that can be that kind of that bridge between getting them involved and leaving them feeling disengaged. Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I've noticed. Okay, so obviously if students don't have rapport, they lack confidence. That's, you know, that's pretty clear. They feel stressed, insecure, anxious, uncomfortable, unsafe, and bored. Yeah. Know their names and also become an expert listener yourself. You know, like really take the time to listen to what you're seeing in front of you and observe what you're seeing in front of you. I think that's what I have taken away. So a few more things. It takes time to get to know your students. Don't think that this is going to just happen overnight. You're going to have to invest a little bit of energy and time into getting to know them. But if you do it, it's going to be worth it. And you're going to have them, you know, in the palm of your hand for more time. Sometimes less is more. And I think that that's something that I'm constantly having to remind myself. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I had the tendency at the beginning of my career to get up and think that I had to talk more. You know, like if they don't understand, I should talk more. I should teach more. That's not always true. Sometimes it's better just to sit back and just do less. Just observe more. Yeah, let go of that need to control things. Active listening again, being patient. And the more patient that you are, the more relaxed that you are, the more relaxed the class environment will be. If you're stressed, forget it. Students feed off that. So it's important. Okay, one last little reflection moment. Just have a little glass of water if you want one. Okay, a little riddle. The more you take, the more you leave behind. What am I? What do you reckon? Can you solve the riddle? Let's see if anyone has an answer to this one. See if anyone has a shadow. Time, age, footprints. Yeah, I saw someone get it. It's footprints. Well done. Okay, guys, last little section. Ways to foster engagement. So these are just a few ways that I have found in my career. I'm sure that you guys have way more. So active learning, we've talked about using technology, fostering autonomy, making sure that they're in charge of their learning. Challenge them, use cooperative learning, use creative modalities as much as you can, debating, music, drama, etc. Share your experiences with them. Interact with students as much as possible and give feedback. And we'll go through a few of these now. So one of the biggest pieces of research that has influenced my classes and my pedagogy over the last few years has been George Lamb's NASA research on genius. I don't know if you guys know of this research, but it's become very popular, where NASA basically researched genius in kids, in 5-year-olds, all the way up through their lives. And they realized that genius starts off being extremely high. 98% you can see from the graph in 5-year-olds, right? 98% of this group of 5-year-olds were considered genius. And then by the time that they got to 31, you can see that it drops down to 2%. So what is going on with our creativity from the age of 5 to 31 that it becomes so much lower? And that's why I find this research amazing. So it's basically saying that genius is problem solving using imagination and creativity, and that curbing divergent thinking creates cognitive conflict and therefore depletes our capacity. Okay, so if you haven't looked at George Lamb's work, there's a lot of TED Talks on his NASA research. Really, really cool to check out. So what does active learning look like? Well, we seem to learn way better when we're playing. And some of you may or may not have children. I have a 19-month little monster here with me who I can see when he's just learning all the time through play. Our brains seem to be hardwired for play. That's how we learn. So I think we need to bring playful elements into our classes. We noticed from research that if you want to learn something without using play, it takes about 400 repetitions. But if we implement playful contexts, it can take only 10 to 20 repetitions. That's huge. So try and create those opportunities for students. Examples of active learning, so inquiry-based, problem-based learning, projects, simulations, games, and experiments. They're all just some ideas. Use them, they work. Let's play. Yeah, connect with that inner child in your student so that they can enjoy, the learning process. Creativity is a huge part of that, obviously, from the research. So drama, creative writing, drama, getting their bodies involved in the learning kinesthetically is amazing. Creative writing, getting their senses involved in the learning. And I've noticed that there's a huge correlation between writing skills and speaking skills, and they feed off one another. So definitely do that. Debating, so that they learn to express themselves and also deal with conflict in English. Conflict is a really, really difficult place to be able to communicate. And it's a huge part of confidence. So if we can get them communicating in debating situations where they have to express a different opinion or they have to challenge, I think that that's really, really important. Storytelling, well, I've spoken a little bit about that. and using music. Language is a musical thing. At least that's the way I see it. So I used a lot of music in Colombia, especially because Colombians tend to be quite musical people. So pronunciation, timing, I used music a lot. Yeah. So those are some ideas that you can play around with. Technology, a great teacher, friend of mine once said, you can either get run over by the bus or you can jump on the bus. So I think for me, it's jumping on the technology bus, moving with it, not necessarily relying on it all the time, but moving with it. Yeah. Using it selectively in our classes, because let's face it, our students are using technology and they're going to need to use it for their English communication skills at some point anyway. And it can be a really great resource as well. Like, you can use the resources online to help with the English learning. My wife here uses a lot of resources for her English learning in Australia. So just need to be careful not to overuse it and use it as like scaffold activities, I think, so that it doesn't become a distraction. That's just the only thing I'd say there. And last couple of slides, feedback, absolutely fundamental. Need to be strategic with feedback and see what works for your class, because what may work for one class doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work for another, like with everything. I always start off with a positive, always ask questions rather than just giving them the answer. I find that it's better to ask them the question so they can find the answer on their own. It just develops that growth mindset that we're talking about. Be specific, but if you're in a friendly environment and they're comfortable, feedback should be pretty easy, yeah, and motivating. Okay, one of my favorite slides of this presentation, the flow state by Csikszentmihalyi. I mean, I took probably half the preparation time of this presentation working out how to say this guy's name. Csikszentmihalyi, the flow state. Now, before I started realizing the flow state in English classes, I thought it was always just about sport. I didn't realize how it could relate to English teaching. But since I've realized that there is a huge capacity to get our students into the flow state where time doesn't seem to have the same feeling, yeah? Like, you go and enjoy yourself with a good friend and you can sit there for 3 hours and it feels like 5 minutes. That's that flow state that we want our students to get into, where 1 hour feels like 10 minutes. And by the end of that lesson, they're like, oh my God, I want more. That flow state. So there are a few things. The goal needs to be achievable. They need to feel that they can achieve it. And they need to be focused, obviously. But they need to enjoy it. They really need to enjoy it. And I can guarantee you, if you get those elements in there, they'll be in that flow state where the communication is just beautiful and it's flowing. It's like a wave. And you don't have to do anything. You just sit back and be part of it and join when you want to and sit back when you don't. So time no longer seems to pass in the same way. So our concept of time changes. And the final thing, just on these last couple of slides, guys, is just remembering that if we want our students to be motivated and engaged, then we need to be motivated, engaged as teachers. So a couple of things here, and I'm sure that you've heard all of this before, but it's super important as teachers to stay healthy and fit, sleep our 8 hours. For me, meditation is the key for me. I'm just a way happier, more relaxed person when I'm meditating. Minimize screen time, spend heaps of time with your families, time in nature, reading every day. I use a lot cold, hot showers. That's one of my things. Do something new every day, which is something that you can tell your students. Set goals on a weekly and monthly basis, both personal, etc. And my final slide is the art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. It was really, really nice to have you here with me. I can see that you guys are all awesome. So good luck, and thank you for listening.
Eduardo, there's a couple of minutes. There are a few questions. If I may, a lot of the questions are kind of about motivation versus children versus adults. With the question being, does what you're saying apply equally to adults as it would do children?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's the same, but you just have to be clever in the ways that you go about. So for me, the same principles apply. Like the younger students need to be motivated to learn English. However, whatever motivation they may have, it could be that mum and dad want them to do it. That could be part of the motivation. With the younger students, I think probably the emphasis on the engagement is even more important, because if they don't see it as being a fun thing, if they don't have play elements in there, it's going to be way harder. And you just need to be strategic in how you organize and structure your class so that it's moving faster, because obviously they have less ability to focus, and they'll need to get up and move more probably. So, I would factor in those elements so that your class is moving faster. It's even more dynamic. They get something. There's a lot of movement and happy kind of activities with music, maybe with dancing, maybe with drama elements, so that they are being stimulated in different ways, which you probably don't have to do as much with adult students, because they can focus a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I would guess that you would give the same answer, but somebody asked about, like, it's okay, but a lot of children are kind of forced to go to learn language by their parents. So, like, there's no motivation there in the first place. So they come into your class demotivated. So how could we deal with that? But I would imagine it's a similar answer, isn't it?
Well, and again, like we said at the beginning, like, motivation doesn't necessarily lead to engagement. Engagement doesn't necessarily. So if they're not motivated because mum and dad are sending them there, they can forget all about that if they enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like, and they will. If they're having a ball, it doesn't matter. It's kind of like, I remember when I was a little kid, my mum and dad used to send me to opera. We used to go to the opera all the time, and I hated it. I was like, I hate opera. I don't want to see someone sing. But then all of a sudden, I started enjoying it, and I started being like, I actually like this. This is kind of cool. So if we can get them into that space of like, oh, this is fun. There's not a negative connotation. Like, there's not a negative experience for them to like say, oh no, if we can create a positive thing for them, they'll go, regardless of what their parents say. They'll enjoy it.
Thank you. Last question then, actually, on parents, because I quite like this question, actually. It was Reddit C asked, so parents are an essential element of how students stay motivated, as we've just discussed. But how can we keep students motivated if parents refuse to do their part?
Well, that's tough, because obviously for the young students, like, they play probably a more important role in that, because that, obviously, as students get older, they become more independent and they obviously do their own thing. But yeah, parents can be a hindrance. So you can only do what you can do, right? The time that you have with them, do the best that you can. And if parents are not on side, you can always give parents recommendations, things that they can do. And that's all you can do, because you can't go over to their house on weekends and sit down and like, hey, I'm here, So you can only do what you can do. And don't be too hard on yourself with that. If do your job, that's all you can do.
Yeah, I agree. I maybe just add that maybe it's often we have to educate the parents more than we have to educate the children sometimes.
Yeah.
In the learning with it. Right. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, Eduardo. Do you want to? I'll be quiet to allow you to say goodbye, etc., and then I'll come on again in a second.
Okay. Well, no, thank you very much, guys. You guys have been awesome. I can see that And I can imagine with all of you are amazing teachers, and good luck with your careers. And thank you for listening to me today. Hopefully we'll see you again in another presentation in the future. Thank you very much.